My name is Elliot Barnes, 68 years old and still living in the same house where I raised my son Thomas. It has been 7 years since my wife Martha passed, leaving me alone with memories and the comfort of familiar surroundings. I have always been proud of Thomas and his success in business, even when it meant sacrifices on our part to put him through college. When he called about visiting this weekend, I spent days preparing, cleaning, and cooking his favorite meals. So when I heard a large truck rumbling into my driveway 3 days early, confusion was my first reaction. If you are watching this from your family home, give it a like and subscribe as we explore what family loyalty really means when put to the test. Martha and I purchased this house 42 years ago, when Thomas was just a toddler. It was not much to look at back then, a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a developing neighborhood outside of Atlanta. We chose it specifically for the good school district, as education was something we both valued deeply. Martha worked as a nurse at the local hospital, while I taught history at Jefferson High for 35 years. Thomas was our only child, born after several heartbreaking miscarriages. Perhaps that was why we poured everything into him, wanting to give him all the opportunities we never had. Martha especially doted on him, her miracle baby. I can still picture her sitting at the kitchen table, helping him with homework long after her hospital shifts had drained her energy. That circular oak table still sits in my kitchen, scarred with pencil marks and memories. Our financial situation was always tight but stable. Teaching salaries in the 80s and 90s were nothing to brag about, and Martha had to reduce her hours when her lupus diagnosis came in Thomas's freshman year of high school. The medical bills piled up alongside college brochures. We had started a college fund when Thomas was born, but the market crashes and Martha's health expenses had taken significant bites out of our savings. When Thomas got accepted to Emory University with only a partial scholarship, Martha and I spent 3 sleepless nights running the numbers. We ultimately took out a second mortgage on the house to cover what the scholarship did not. I picked up summer school teaching and weekend tutoring jobs. Martha worked whenever her health permitted. We delayed retirement savings, cut every possible expense, and wore the same clothes for years. I remember the pride at Thomas's graduation, watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown. Martha was having a good day health-wise, her smile brighter than the spring sunshine. We believed every sacrifice had been worth it in that moment. Thomas had a business degree from a prestigious university and job offers already lined up. Our boy was going to have a better life than we had, which was all we ever wanted. The changes were gradual at first. Thomas moved to Charlotte for his first job, about 4 hours away. Weekly calls became monthly. Visits went from monthly to holidays only. I understood he was busy building his career, working long hours to impress his bosses. Martha kept our family photo albums meticulously updated, though new photos became increasingly rare. When Thomas was 29, he called with exciting news. He had met someone special. Amanda was a marketing executive at his company, smart and ambitious. The wedding was 8 months later, an elaborate affair at an upscale hotel that made Martha and me feel somewhat out of place among Amanda's large family of doctors and lawyers. I remember how Thomas barely had time to speak with us at his own reception, though Martha insisted it was natural with so many guests to attend to. Amanda was polite but distant during those first few family gatherings. She would comment on our quaint home and traditional decor, words that felt like gentle criticisms wrapped in compliments. Martha, ever the peacemaker, would simply squeeze my hand under the table when I started to bristle. After Martha's cancer diagnosis, Thomas and Amanda's visits became even less frequent. Thomas explained that Amanda was allergic to the medications Martha was taking, though I never understood how that worked. When Martha passed away 5 months later, they attended the funeral but had to leave immediately after for an important business function. Thomas called regularly for a few weeks after, then settled back into our occasional contact pattern. Over the following 7 years, a troubling pattern emerged. Thomas would call when he needed something, advice on investments or information about family medical history. He and Amanda would visit once or twice a year, usually around Christmas or Thomas's birthday. These visits increasingly featured discussions of their financial achievements, juxtaposed with complaints about being house poor or having unexpected expenses. I noticed Thomas would often survey our home during these visits, commenting on items Martha and I had collected over our lifetime together. "That grandfather clock must be worth something now, Dad. Or those vintage kitchen appliances are trendy again." I always dismissed these comments, attributing them to casual conversation rather than calculation. Our house was not fancy by any measure, but it was paid off and filled with memories. The solid oak dining set where we had celebrated 40 Thanksgivings. The vintage refrigerator that hummed a bit loudly but had never needed repairs. The landscape paintings Martha had collected from local artists over decades. Each item told a story of our life together, more valuable to me than whatever monetary worth they might have. In recent months, Thomas had mentioned they were considering buying a larger house, something more suitable for entertaining clients and future family expansion. I was cautiously excited at the prospect of grandchildren, though Amanda had always been ambivalent about kids. I offered financial help if they needed it, though my fixed retirement income was limited. Thomas assured me they had it under control, but appreciated having options. So when Thomas called last week about visiting this weekend, I spent days preparing. I cleaned every corner of the house, Martha's habit that had become mine. I bought groceries to make Thomas's favorite meatloaf, a recipe that Martha had perfected over decades. I even pulled out old photo albums, thinking it might be nice to reminisce together. The sound of an unfamiliar engine in my driveway pulled me from these preparations 3 days earlier than expected. I pulled aside the living room curtains to see a large moving truck parked beside a luxury SUV I recognized as Thomas's latest purchase. Confusion and a faint sense of dread began to form in my stomach as I watched my son and daughter-in-law exit their vehicle without the warm smiles I had anticipated. The moving truck engine continued rumbling as I stepped onto the front porch. Thomas wore khaki shorts and a polo shirt, looking more like he was prepared for a day at the golf course than a family visit. Amanda was tapping away at her phone, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Neither looked up immediately as I called out a surprised greeting. "Thomas? I thought you were coming this weekend. What is all this?" I gestured toward the truck where 2 burly men in moving company uniforms were standing by the rear door. Thomas finally approached, giving me a quick side hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "Change of plans, Dad. We closed on the house early and needed to get some things moved in right away." His eyes darted past me into the house, avoiding direct contact with mine. Amanda finally looked up from her phone, offering a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Elliot, your lawn is looking a bit overgrown. Have you considered hiring a service? At your age, yard work can be dangerous." Without waiting for a response, she brushed past me into the house, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors Martha had lovingly maintained for decades. I followed them inside, confusion mounting as Amanda immediately began walking from room to room, making notes on her phone. "This place is exactly as I remember it. So, unchanged. Do you ever update anything, Elliot?" "I like things the way Martha arranged them," I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness from my voice. "What exactly's going on here? Why the moving truck?" Thomas was measuring the width of my entertainment center with a tape measure he had pulled from his pocket. "We were thinking, Dad, your place has so much stuff for just one person, and our new house has all these empty rooms that need filling." The realization of what was happening began to dawn on me, a cold feeling settling in my chest. "You want to borrow some furniture?" Amanda laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Not borrow, Elliot. You live in the past, surrounded by all these old things. They could be put to much better use in our new home, where people will actually see and appreciate them." Thomas at least had the decency to look uncomfortable as he continued measuring various pieces of furniture. "Dad, you know how expensive it is to furnish a house from scratch. These are family pieces anyway. They should stay in the family." "They are staying in the family," I said quietly. "With me, in my home." Thomas sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it momentarily distracted me. "Look, we have been talking about this for a while. You have all this space and stuff you barely use. You have been saying yourself that it is getting harder to clean and maintain everything." I had said no such thing, but before I could contradict him, Amanda interjected. The movers charge by the hour. Thomas, we need to get started. She turned to me with a practiced smile. Elliot, we are doing you a favor, really. Downsizing is healthy at your stage of life. Less to worry about. The movers had entered now, standing awkwardly in my entryway, awaiting instructions. I felt like I was in some bizarre dream where nothing made sense. This was my son, the little boy I had taught to ride a bike in our driveway, who I had comforted after nightmares, who Martha and I had sacrificed everything for. Now he was standing in my living room, preparing to take my possessions without so much as a proper conversation about it. Thomas, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I do not understand what is happening here. You cannot just show up and take my things. They are family things, Dad, Thomas replied, his voice taking on the patient tone one might use with a confused child. And honestly, you do not need all this anymore. The big TV, the entertainment system, the extra furniture. It is ridiculous for one person to rattle around in a 3-bedroom house with all this stuff. I flashed back to Thomas at 7 years old, learning about sharing in elementary school. Martha and I had carefully taught him to always ask, before taking something that belonged to someone else, to respect other people's property and feelings. Where had those lessons gone? Amanda had moved to the kitchen now, opening cabinet doors and drawers. Your stand mixer. I have been wanting one of these. And look at this vintage toaster oven. So retro. The copper cookware too. Perfect for our new kitchen aesthetic. My shock was giving way to a growing sense of violation as they continued to assess my home as if it were a department store. The casual way they discussed which of my possessions would fit their needs felt surreal and deeply hurtful. The moving truck is here because you plan to take my things today? Right now? Without asking me properly? I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Thomas finally met my eyes, a flash of something, perhaps guilt, crossing his face before he squared his shoulders. Dad, we are not asking to take everything. Just the things you do not need anymore. This is what family does. They help each other out. I do not recall offering to help by giving away my possessions, I replied, anger beginning to replace shock. Amanda walked back into the living room, addressing the movers rather than me. Let us start with the living room, the entertainment center, the leather sofa set, the end tables, and that antique floor lamp. Then we will move to the kitchen appliances. She turned to me with a dismissive wave. This is for our new house. You do not need this anymore. Those words, spoken so casually, cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever experienced. In that moment, I saw Thomas not as my son, but as a stranger who had calculated the value of my existence and found it wanting. Someone who had decided that my comfort, my memories, my choice about how to live in my own home counted for nothing compared to his wants. The movers looked uncertainly between Amanda and me, sensing the tension. Thomas stepped forward, patting my shoulder awkwardly. It will be fine, Dad. You will see. Once all this clutter is gone, your life will be simpler. Maybe you will even consider moving to one of those nice senior communities we talked about. We had never talked about senior communities. The realization that they had been planning this, discussing my future without my input, sent a wave of betrayal washing over me. As the movers cautiously approached my entertainment center, beginning to unplug cables and assess how to move it, I felt as though I were watching my life being dismantled piece by piece. The systematic dismantling of my home began with an efficiency that suggested practice. The movers, now receiving direct instructions from Amanda, disconnected my television and sound system, equipment I had carefully saved for after retirement. Thomas stood by, occasionally helping but mostly checking his phone and avoiding my gaze. This TV is only 2 years old, I protested as they began wrapping it in moving blankets. I watch the history documentaries on it every evening. You can watch them on a smaller TV, Dad, Thomas replied without looking up from his phone. This 70-inch is wasted on one person. We are going to set up a proper media room. One of the movers, a young man with kind eyes, gave me an uncomfortable look. Sir, are you sure you are okay with us taking these items? We can stop if this is not approved. Before I could respond, Amanda stepped between us. Of course he approves. This is his son. We are helping organize his life. Family matter. She turned to me with a warning look. Right, Elliot? The implied threat was clear. Make a scene, and what little relationship I had with my son might disappear entirely. I stepped back, watching helplessly as they wrapped and removed my sofa, the one Martha had selected for comfort during her illness. We had spent countless evenings there, her head on my shoulder as we watched old movies during her final months. The raid moved to the kitchen next. The refrigerator I had purchased just last year, energy efficient and perfectly sized for my needs. The microwave, toaster oven, and coffee maker all disappeared into the truck. Amanda exclaimed with delight upon discovering Martha's collection of copper cookware, still gleaming from my regular polishing. These must be worth a fortune now. Copper is so in for kitchen design, she marveled, running her fingers along the bottom of a saucepan Martha had used to make Thomas's favorite birthday dinners throughout his childhood. Those were Martha's pride and joy, I said quietly. She collected them piece by piece over 30 years. Amanda barely acknowledged my comment. And now they will be showcased in a modern kitchen where guests can actually appreciate them. They have been hidden away in your cabinets for years. Thomas at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Dad, you barely cook elaborate meals anymore. These will get better use with us. Maybe when you come visit for dinner, Amanda can use them to make something special. The hollow promise hung in the air. In 7 years, I had been invited to exactly 3 meals at their previous home, each time to celebrate Thomas's job promotions or business successes. The dining room was next. The oak table where our family had shared thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, done homework, and made life decisions. The china cabinet, containing Martha's grandmother's wedding dishes, passed down through generations. The buffet where holiday meals had been served since before Thomas was born. You are just one person now, Dad, Thomas explained as they emptied the china cabinet. You eat at the kitchen counter most days anyway. This is just taking up space. That space is mine to fill as I choose, I replied, my voice growing firmer as the initial shock began to harden into resolve. These things are not just functional objects. They are my memories, my connection to your mother and our life together. Thomas sighed dramatically. Mom has been gone for 7 years. You cannot live in a museum to her memory forever. It is not healthy. The casual dismissal of Martha's importance in my life, in our family, sent a spike of anger through me. This was not about health or practicality. This was theft disguised as concern. As the dining room was emptied, Amanda directed the movers upstairs to the spare bedrooms. I followed in growing distress as they began dismantling the guest room furniture, including the bed Thomas had used throughout his childhood. We are setting up a proper guest suite, Amanda explained, not even looking at me as she instructed the movers which pieces to take. Your old furniture is solid wood, much better quality than the mass-produced stuff today. The raid continued room by room. The home office where I still volunteered remotely for veteran support services, my computer desk and comfortable chair disappearing into the truck. The bookshelves Martha and I had filled over decades of shared reading interests. Even my bedroom was not spared, Amanda declaring my dresser perfect for their guest room and my nightstands exactly what we need for the master suite. The most painful moment came when they entered the small sitting room where Martha's art collection hung. Simple landscapes from local artists we had discovered on weekend drives, each painting connected to a specific memory or anniversary. Amanda walked from piece to piece, assessing them with a critical eye. These frames are quite nice, very vintage looking, she said, already gesturing for the movers to start taking them down. They will work perfectly in our hallway gallery. I stepped forward then, physically placing myself between the movers and Martha's favorite painting, a small watercolor of the North Georgia mountains where we had spent our 20th anniversary. No, not these. The paintings stay. Thomas frowned, finally looking directly at me. Dad, they are just gathering dust here. No one ever sees them but you. They are not decorations, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. They are memories. Your mother and I chose each one together. This one here, I pointed to the mountain scene, was where we stayed for our anniversary the year you started college. We could barely afford the trip after paying your tuition deposit, but your mother insisted we needed to celebrate properly. A flicker of recognition crossed Thomas's face. quickly replaced by impatience. We can make new memories with them, Dad. They would look great in our new house. They are not yours to take, I said firmly, standing my ground despite Amanda's obvious annoyance. For a brief moment, I thought Thomas might relent. Instead, he turned to the movers. Let us come back to this room. Start loading what we have so far. As they headed back downstairs, I surveyed the now half-empty rooms of my home, the bare spaces where furniture had stood for decades, the faded rectangles on the walls where paintings had hung. My house was being hollowed out, just as my relationship with my son seemed to be. Amanda was checking items off a list on her phone. The appliances are a great start. We should be able to get the major furniture pieces in this load. We can come back next week for the smaller items. The casual planning for future raids pushed me past shock into a simmering anger. As they continued directing the movers, I overheard Amanda whispering to Thomas, "Once we clear enough out, he will see the house is too big for him. The assisted living conversation will be much easier." It was then I realized this was not just about furnishing their new house. This was the beginning of erasing me from my own life, step by calculated step. As the movers carried out the last of my kitchen chairs, something inside me finally snapped. The paralysis of shock gave way to a surge of anger that felt almost foreign after years of accommodating Thomas's gradual emotional distance. "Stop!" My voice came out louder than I had intended, halting the movers in their tracks. "Put that back and leave my house. Now." Thomas looked up from his clipboard, surprise evident on his face. "Dad, do not make a scene. The movers are on a schedule. I do not care about their schedule. I care that my son has walked into my home with strangers and started taking my possessions without my permission." I moved to block the doorway, my heart pounding but my resolve strengthening with each beat. "We talked about this," Thomas insisted, though we both knew that was a lie. "No, Thomas. You and Amanda talked about this. Without me. You made decisions about my home, my belongings, and apparently my future without even having the decency to include me in the conversation." The hurt and betrayal I had been suppressing came pouring out. "What happened to you? The son I raised would never treat anyone this way, let alone his own father." Thomas's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and defensive anger. "You are overreacting. We are just helping you downsize. You are living in all this space by yourself, surrounded by things you barely use. That is my choice to make." My voice cracked slightly. "These are not just things, Thomas. This is the life your mother and I built together. Each piece has meaning and memories that you are casually loading into a truck like they are merchandise." The movers had set down their current load, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. Amanda stepped forward, her practiced customer service smile in place. "Elliot, we understand you are attached to these items. That is natural at your age. But you need to think practically. You are getting older, and managing a house this size with all these things will only become more difficult." Her condescending tone only fueled my determination. "I am 68, not 98. I am perfectly capable of deciding what I can and cannot manage." "Dad," Thomas interjected, his voice taking on the patient tone that made my blood boil, "we are thinking about your future. Eventually, you will need to downsize, probably move into assisted living. Why not start the process now, on your own terms?" "My own terms?" I laughed bitterly. "You call this my terms? You show up unannounced with a moving truck and start emptying my house without so much as asking first." "We knew you would resist," Amanda said matter-of-factly. "Older people always do. They get set in their ways, unable to see what is best for them. What is best for me is not having my home raided by my own family." The hurt was overwhelming now. "I put you through college, Thomas. Your mother and I took out a second mortgage on this very house to give you opportunities. We wore the same clothes for years, skipped vacations, delayed retirement. And this is how you repay that sacrifice? By deciding my belongings are yours for the taking?" A flash of shame crossed Thomas's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "This is just stuff, Dad. Do not be so materialistic. You should be happy to help us furnish our new home." "This is not about materialism," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is about respect. This is about recognizing that I am still a person with agency and feelings, not an inconvenient old man whose preferences do not matter. Amanda scoffed, checking her watch impatiently. We are wasting time with this emotional display. The movers charge by the hour, Thomas. Your mother would be so disappointed, I said quietly, looking directly at my son. Not about the things being taken, but about the way you are doing it. About what this says about how you view family obligations. Thomas's face hardened at the mention of Martha. Do not bring Mom into this. You are the one being selfish here, keeping all this stuff when we could use it, when you know we are just starting out in our new place. Starting out? I could not help but laugh incredulously. Thomas, you are 39 years old with a six-figure income. You drive a luxury car and just purchased your second home. You are hardly struggling newlyweds who need help getting established. Our mortgage is enormous, Amanda interjected. Do you have any idea what furniture costs these days? We are trying to be financially responsible by reusing family items instead of buying new. Then you should have asked, I replied simply. You should have approached me respectfully, as one adult to another, not schemed behind my back and arrived with a moving truck as if my consent was unnecessary. Thomas ran his hands through his hair in frustration, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it momentarily pierced my anger with a pang of nostalgia. Dad, you are making this way more complicated than it needs to be. This is what families do. They share resources. No, Thomas, this is not sharing. This is taking. And it stops now. I turned to the movers who were standing awkwardly by the door. I apologize for the confusion, gentlemen, but I am not consenting to the removal of any more items from my home. In fact, I would like the items already loaded to be returned immediately. Dad, Thomas exclaimed in disbelief. Sir, one of the movers said hesitantly to Thomas, we cannot remove items without the homeowner's permission. It is against company policy. Amanda stepped forward, voice tight with anger. The homeowner's son has permission to access family property. This is ridiculous. Not without my explicit consent, I countered firmly. The standoff continued, tension thick in the air. Thomas's face cycled through expressions, disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally a cold determination that chilled me. Fine, keep your precious things, Dad, but do not expect us to take care of you when you can no longer manage on your own. And do not be surprised if we do not visit as often. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between us. If your visits depend on what material goods you can extract from me, then perhaps they are not visits I should value, I replied quietly. Amanda turned to Thomas, visibly fuming. I told you we should have done this differently. Now we have wasted an entire day and hundreds of dollars on movers for nothing. She did not even attempt to lower her voice, speaking as if I were not present or capable of understanding. We will figure something out, Thomas muttered, already typing on his phone, presumably canceling or modifying their moving plans. As they argued between themselves, I stood in my partially emptied living room, surrounded by the spaces where my life had been just hours before. The hurt was profound, but alongside it grew something unexpected. Clarity. For years I had made excuses for Thomas's behavior, blinded by parental love and the desire to maintain our relationship at any cost. But this blatant display of disrespect had finally stripped away my illusions. The movers stood awkwardly, awaiting final instructions as Thomas and Amanda continued their heated discussion. I knew this confrontation was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt certain of my position. This was my home, my life, and it was time I stood firm in defending both. As Thomas and Amanda continued their whispered argument near the front door, I retreated to my study, the one room they had not yet invaded. My hands were trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, but my mind was surprisingly clear. This small room had been Martha's special project before her illness took hold, lined with built-in bookshelves and featuring a solid oak desk that had been my retirement gift to myself. I sat heavily in my desk chair, taking deep breaths to steady myself. On the wall hung Martha's favorite quote, framed in simple wood. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. Today, I needed to find the courage to roar. Opening the bottom desk drawer, I pulled out a leather portfolio Martha had meticulously maintained. Inside were all our important documents: property deed, insurance policies, wills, and financial records. Martha had always been the organized one, insisting we keep everything in order just in case. Now her foresight would be my salvation. As I flipped through the papers, a sealed envelope caught my attention. In Martha's neat handwriting was written, "For Elliot, when needed." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before her death, along with several legal documents. "My darling Elliot," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you've encountered a situation where you need to be reminded of your rights and worth. I've watched Thomas and Amanda's behavior with growing concern. While I pray my worries are unfounded, I've taken steps to protect you just in case." Martha, even in her final months, had seen what I had been unwilling to acknowledge. The letter explained that she had consulted with a lawyer friend about protecting our assets. The accompanying documents clearly established that all household items were solely in my name, with specific mentions of her art collection, family heirlooms, and major appliances. She had even included photographs of our most valuable possessions, with notarized statements of ownership. "Remember, loving our son doesn't mean allowing him to take advantage of you," her letter continued. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is to teach them there are consequences for their actions, even when they're adults." Tears blurred my vision as I read her final words. "Stand firm, my love. You deserve respect and consideration, especially from those who claim to love you." With renewed resolve, I gathered the documents and reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Jack Wilson, my neighbor for the past 20 years and a retired police officer. Jack had helped me with home repairs after Martha passed, and we had developed a friendship built on morning coffees and occasional fishing trips. "Jack," I said when he answered, "I need your help. Thomas and Amanda are here with a moving truck, taking my belongings without permission. I've told them to stop, but they're not listening." Jack's response was immediate and firm. "I'll be right over, Elliot. Don't let them remove anything else." While waiting for Jack, I made one more call to Diane Peterson, a local attorney who had helped with Martha's estate. Her secretary put me through immediately. "Mr. Barnes, what can I do for you today?" Diane's professional voice was reassuring. "I need advice about preventing unauthorized removal of my property," I explained quickly, outlining the situation with Thomas and Amanda. "Do you have documentation of ownership?" she asked. "Yes, Martha prepared everything." "Perfect. Here's what you need to do." Armed with legal knowledge and Martha's foresight, I returned to the living room where Thomas and Amanda were instructing the movers to continue loading items despite my previous objections. "Stop right there," I said firmly, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "I have here the legal documentation proving my sole ownership of everything in this house. If you continue removing these items without my written permission, it constitutes theft." Thomas turned, surprise evident on his face. "Dad, don't be ridiculous. This is family property." "No, Thomas. This is my property, legally and rightfully. I've just spoken with my attorney, who is prepared to file for an emergency injunction if necessary." I held up Martha's carefully prepared documents. "Your mother anticipated something like this might happen. She made sure I would be protected." Amanda scoffed, though I noticed uncertainty flicker across her face. "You're bluffing. Martha would never have done something like that against her own son. Martha would do anything to protect her family from harm, including protecting me from being taken advantage of, and protecting Thomas from making terrible moral choices he would later regret." My voice was calm now, bolstered by Martha's posthumous support and the righteousness of my position. The movers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly wanting no part in what was now explicitly identified as a potential legal issue. One of them stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, given the circumstances, we can't continue until this ownership dispute is resolved. Company policy." Before Thomas could argue further, the sound of a car door slamming drew our attention. Jack Wilson strode up my driveway, his imposing 6'2" frame and natural authority immediately changing the dynamic. Though retired for several years, he still carried himself with the confidence of his former profession. "Everything okay here, Elliot?" Jack asked. though his gaze was fixed firmly on Thomas and Amanda. Not exactly, Jack. Thomas and Amanda arrived unannounced with this moving truck and have been removing my belongings without permission. When I objected, they continued anyway. Jack nodded, turning to the movers. Gentlemen, I'm Jack Wilson, retired police officer. I'd suggest you pause operations until this family matter is resolved legally. Otherwise, you could be facilitating theft of property, which would implicate your company in a criminal matter. The lead mover nodded quickly. We were just telling them the same thing, sir. We need clear ownership consent or we can't proceed. Thomas's face had gone pale. This is absurd. We're his family. We're helping him downsize. Against his clearly stated wishes, Jack pointed out. That's not helping. That's taking. And taking property without permission has a specific legal term. By now, the commotion had attracted attention from other neighbors. Linda from across the street stood at the edge of my lawn, concern evident on her face. The Johnsons from next door had come outside as well, watching the scene unfold. Amanda tugged urgently at Thomas's arm. We need to go, now. This is becoming a spectacle. Thomas hesitated, looking between the movers, Jack, and the growing audience of neighbors. The moving truck was now partially loaded with my belongings, but they were blocked from leaving by Jack's car, strategically parked behind the truck. Thomas, I said, my voice softer now, please don't make this worse than it already is. Tell the movers to return my belongings, and then we can talk about this like adults. For a moment, I glimpsed the son I had raised, uncertainty and shame crossing his features. But Amanda's insistent tugging seemed to harden his resolve. Fine. Keep your precious things, Dad. But don't come asking for our help when you can't manage anymore. He turned to the movers. Let's go. Leave what we've already loaded. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way, Jack interjected calmly. The items in the truck need to be returned before anyone leaves. Otherwise, I'll have to call my former colleagues at the department to file a report. Thomas and Amanda froze at the mention of police involvement, suddenly understanding the seriousness of their actions. As they stood paralyzed by indecision at the end of my driveway, Jack's car blocking their exit, I finally felt the power dynamic shift. For the first time since their arrival, I was not the one being controlled or manipulated. Martha had ensured I would not be left defenseless, and now I had the support of friends who saw my worth beyond what possessions I could provide. The standoff in my driveway lasted several uncomfortable minutes. Thomas and Amanda stood by their SUV, engaged in heated whispers while occasionally glancing back at the growing number of neighbors who had gathered. Jack remained positioned strategically by his car, arms crossed and expression resolute. The movers waited awkwardly by their truck, clearly wanting no further part in this family drama. I stood on my porch, Martha's documents clutched in my hand, finding strength in her posthumous protection. Linda from across the street had made her way to my side, her presence a silent show of support from someone who had brought me casseroles for weeks after Martha's funeral. Thomas, I finally called out, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. This can end one of two ways. Either the movers return everything they've taken and you leave peacefully, or we escalate this to a legal matter. The choice is yours, but I suggest you think carefully about the consequences. My son's face flushed with anger, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Amanda leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear, her expression shifting from outrage to worry as she surveyed the witnesses to their behavior. After what seemed like an eternity, Thomas nodded curtly to the movers. Unload the truck. Put everything back where you found it. The lead mover appeared visibly relieved. Yes, sir. Right away. What followed was an awkward reversal of the earlier raid. Furniture, appliances, and personal items were carefully carried back into my home under the watchful eyes of Jack and my neighbors. Each return felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of not just physical objects but of my autonomy and dignity. As the movers worked, Thomas approached the porch, his expression a complex mixture of resentment and embarrassment. Amanda remained by the SUV, furiously typing on her phone, refusing to participate in the reversal of her plan. You're making a huge mistake, Dad, Thomas said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You can't maintain this house forever. Sooner or later, You'll need help. When that day comes, I'll make my own decisions about downsizing, I replied calmly. With the help of people who respect me enough to include me in conversations about my own life, Thomas scoffed. This is what happens when we try to help you. You turn it into a public spectacle, humiliating us in front of strangers. The injustice of his statement struck me like a physical blow. I didn't create this situation, Thomas. You and Amanda did when you decided to treat me like an inconvenience, rather than your father. When you chose to take rather than ask. We knew you'd say no if we asked, he muttered, confirming my suspicions about their premeditated plan. That was my right. These are my possessions in my home. Your mother and I worked our entire lives for these things. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. But this isn't really about furniture and appliances, is it? This is about respect and how you view me now that I'm older and living alone. Before Thomas could respond, Amanda stormed up to the porch, her patience clearly exhausted. This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much this failed moving attempt is costing us? Not to mention the embarrassment. Amanda, I said quietly, the only embarrassing behavior today has been the attempt to strip an elderly parent's home without permission. I'm simply defending what's rightfully mine. Her face contorted with barely controlled rage. This was your idea, Thomas, she hissed at my son. I told you we should have just convinced him to move to assisted living first, then dealt with the house. But no, you said this would be easier. The casual cruelty of their planning hit me anew. They had been discussing my future, plotting the dismantling of my life, without ever considering my wishes or feelings. The realization strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. I think it's time for you both to leave, I said firmly. Once the movers have returned everything, of course. You can't just dismiss us like employees, Dad, Thomas protested, though his voice lacked conviction. I'm not dismissing you as employees. I'm setting a boundary as a person who deserves basic respect. I looked him directly in the eyes, parent to adult child, something I should have done years ago. Mrs. Johnson, my 75-year-old neighbor who had rarely spoken more than a polite greeting to me over the years, suddenly stepped forward from the small crowd of onlookers. Shame on you, young man, she said, her voice quavering but determined. My Harold and I watched you grow up in this house. Your parents gave everything for you. And this is how you repay that sacrifice? By trying to rob your father blind? Thomas blanched at the public condemnation. Other neighbors nodded in agreement, murmurs of disapproval rippling through the small gathering. The community I had quietly lived in for decades was rallying around me, showing me I wasn't as alone as I had sometimes felt since Martha's passing. As the last pieces of furniture were returned to their places, Jack approached Thomas and Amanda. I think we're done here. I suggest you both leave now, before this situation escalates further. Are you threatening us? Amanda demanded, though she was already backing toward their SUV. Not at all, ma'am. Just offering sound advice from someone who's seen family disputes turn ugly. Jack's tone was professional but left no room for argument. Thomas looked at me one last time, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. This isn't over, Dad. You can't live here alone forever. Sooner or later, you'll need us. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But if that day comes, it will be on my terms, not yours. And any help I accept will come from people who see me as a person worthy of dignity and respect, not as an obstacle to be managed or a resource to be exploited. Without another word, Thomas turned and followed Amanda to their SUV. The moving truck pulled away first, the empty vehicle a testament to my small victory. As Thomas and Amanda drove off, I noticed several neighbors taking photos of their license plate, a silent promise of community vigilance I found deeply touching. Jack stayed until the vehicles disappeared from view, then turned to me with concern. You okay, Elliot? That was pretty intense. I think I will be, I replied honestly. It hurts, but it's also clarifying in a way. You should consider changing your locks, he advised pragmatically, and maybe setting up a security camera or two. People who try something like this once often try again. Linda squeezed my hand supportively. We'll keep an eye out, Elliot, and you're welcome to join us for dinner tonight if you don't want to be alone. As my neighbors gradually dispersed, offering words of support and promises to check in, I stood on my porch looking at the house Martha and I had filled with love and memories. The furniture was back in place, but everything felt different. A boundary had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. A harsh truth revealed that couldn't be unseen. I walked inside and closed the door, surrounded once again by my possessions but feeling the profound absence of what really mattered. The family bond I had believed was unbreakable. Thomas's betrayal left a wound deeper than any physical loss could have inflicted. Yet alongside the pain was a surprising sense of strength, as if in defending my home, I had reclaimed a part of myself that had been slowly eroding since Martha's death. That evening, as I sat in my living room looking at Martha's favorite painting, I made a promise to myself and to her memory. I would no longer enable Thomas's disrespect in the name of maintaining peace. Whatever relationship we rebuilt, if any, would have to be founded on mutual respect rather than obligation or utility. It was a painful resolution, but as Martha would have said, sometimes love requires difficult choices. The house felt different in the days following what I had come to think of as the raid. Though everything had been returned to its place, the sanctity of my home had been violated. I found myself double-checking the locks at night and startling at unexpected sounds, as if some part of me expected Thomas and Amanda to return with reinforcements. Jack followed through on his suggestion about security, helping me install a simple camera system that would alert my phone if anyone approached the house. Linda and several other neighbors made a point of stopping by regularly, their visits a balancing force against the painful absence of my son. Sleep came fitfully those first few nights. I would lie awake replaying the confrontation, wondering if I could have handled things differently or if I had somehow failed as a father to raise a son who could treat me with such calculated disregard. The weight of these thoughts left me exhausted during the day, moving through my routines like a ghost in my own life. A week after the incident, Diane Peterson, the attorney, visited to help me update my will and establish a living trust. Martha's foresight had protected me once, but I needed to ensure all legal protections were firmly in place for the future. Unfortunately, what you experienced isn't uncommon, Diane explained gently as we reviewed the documents. We call it pre-death inheritance syndrome sometimes. Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' possessions before they've passed. I never thought Thomas would be that type of person, I said, the admission painful even after what had happened. Family dynamics can change dramatically as parents age, she replied. The important thing is that you're taking steps to protect yourself and establish clear boundaries now. The updated legal documents provided practical protection, but they did nothing to heal the emotional wound of Thomas's betrayal. For that, I found myself returning to a practice Martha had always encouraged: journaling. Each morning, I wrote about my feelings, memories, hopes, and fears, the act of putting words on paper somehow making the burden lighter. 2 weeks after the incident, my phone rang with Thomas's number. I stared at the screen for several rings, debating whether to answer. Finally, taking a deep breath, I accepted the call. "Dad?" Thomas's voice sounded hesitant, lacking the confident tone he typically used with me. "How are you?" "I'm managing," I replied neutrally, unwilling to give more until I understood his purpose in calling. A long pause followed before he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we approached things. I think we handled it badly. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I had expected." "Yes, you did." Another pause. "Could we meet somewhere, to talk? Maybe that diner you like on Maple Street?" I considered his request carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further hurt. But another part, the part that would always be a father, regardless of my son's behavior, wanted to leave the door open for reconciliation if it was genuinely sought. "Just you," I specified, "not Amanda." "Okay," he agreed quickly. "Tomorrow at 11? We met at Rosie's Diner, a local establishment Martha and I had frequented for Sunday breakfasts throughout our marriage. I arrived early, selecting a booth near the back that offered privacy without isolation. Thomas arrived precisely at 11, looking more disheveled than I had seen him in years, with shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights that mirrored my own. "Thanks for coming, Dad," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. He looked around the diner with recognition. Mom loved this place. She did, I agreed, waiting for him to continue rather than filling the uncomfortable silence. After ordering coffee, Thomas fidgeted with his napkin, seeming to struggle with where to begin. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes directly for the first time since entering. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "What we did was wrong. I knew it was wrong even while we were doing it, but I convinced myself it was for your benefit somehow." "Why, Thomas?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why not just ask me if you needed help furnishing your new house? I would have given you some things willingly, if approached respectfully." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Amanda has been difficult lately. She has very specific ideas about how our life should look, the image we should project. The new house stretched our finances more than we should have allowed. That doesn't explain treating me like I had no say in my own home," I pointed out. "No, it doesn't," he acknowledged. "The truth is, I've been taking the path of least resistance with Amanda for years. When she suggested we could help you downsize while getting what we needed for the house, I went along with it rather than standing up for what was right." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "We're having problems, Dad. Serious ones. This house was supposed to fix things somehow, but it's just made everything worse." I felt a complicated mixture of sympathy for my son's marital troubles and frustration that they had culminated in violating my home and trust. "I'm sorry to hear that, Thomas, but your marriage problems don't justify what happened." "I know. I'm not trying to excuse it. Just explain." He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "After we left your place, things exploded between us. Amanda blamed me for the public humiliation, said I should have handled you better. I finally stood up to her, told her what we did was wrong, and she's been staying with her sister ever since." "I see," I said carefully, not wanting to be drawn into their marital issues but acknowledging the context he was providing. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about how I've changed over the years," Thomas continued, "about the values you and Mom taught me and how far I've strayed from them. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring success by possessions and appearances, rather than character and relationships. The insight surprised me, showing a level of self-awareness I hadn't been sure Thomas still possessed. That's a valuable realization. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Dad. What I did violated your trust in a fundamental way, but I want to try to rebuild our relationship, if you're willing. On your terms." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw genuine regret and a vulnerability that reminded me of the boy he had once been. "I need time, Thomas, and any rebuilding has to start with respect and boundaries. I am not ready to have you back in my home yet, and I certainly am not ready to see Amanda." He nodded, accepting this limitation without protest. "I understand. Would it be okay if I called you more regularly? Maybe we could meet for lunch sometimes, like this?" It was a small first step, but perhaps an important one. "I think I would like that," I admitted. As we parted outside the diner, Thomas hesitated, then asked, "How did Mom know? Those legal documents you had, they were prepared before she died, weren't they?" "Your mother saw things clearly, even when I couldn't," I replied. "She loved you fiercely, Thomas, but she was also wise enough to recognize potential problems and prepare for them." "I miss her," he said quietly. "I think I would have turned out better if she had lived longer." "That was your choice, son. We all face challenges and losses. It's what we do afterward that defines us." In the weeks that followed, Thomas called regularly as promised. Our conversations were initially awkward but gradually eased into a cautious rebuilding of connection. He shared that he and Amanda had started marriage counseling, though he was unsure if the relationship could or should be salvaged. Meanwhile, I focused on expanding my own life beyond the shell it had become after Martha's death. Jack convinced me to join the local veterans coffee group that met Tuesday mornings at the community center. Linda introduced me to her book club, where I was the only male member but was welcomed warmly nonetheless. Through these new connections, I began to realize how isolated I had allowed myself to become, relying too heavily on the increasingly infrequent contact with Thomas for social interaction. Martha would have been disappointed in how I had withdrawn from community life after her passing. 6 months after the incident, I hired an estate planning specialist to create a comprehensive will and trust arrangement. Everything was clearly documented and legally binding, with specific provisions for family heirlooms and sentimental items. I named Jack as my healthcare proxy rather than Thomas, a decision that brought both sadness and relief. When Thomas and I met for Thanksgiving dinner at a local restaurant, I shared these arrangements with him openly. "This isn't meant as punishment," I explained. "It's about creating clarity and preventing future conflicts. You'll still inherit most of my estate, but with structures in place to honor my wishes." To my surprise, Thomas nodded in understanding. "It's the right decision, Dad. I haven't earned back that trust yet, and maybe I never fully will. But I'm working on becoming someone who deserves it again." As we finished our meal, Thomas hesitantly shared news of his separation from Amanda. The counseling helped us realize we want fundamentally different things in life. She's focused on appearances and status. I'm trying to reconnect with the values you and Mom taught me. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of support that felt both foreign and familiar. Finding your way back to your core values is never easy, but it's always worthwhile. That evening, sitting in my living room surrounded by the possessions Thomas and Amanda had tried to take, I realized something important. The value of these items had never been in their monetary worth or utility. Their true value lay in the memories they held, the life they represented. Yet I also understood that eventually, the time would come when downsizing would be my choice, made on my terms and timeline. The greatest lesson from this painful chapter wasn't about possessions at all, but about the difference between unconditional love and unconditional acceptance. I would always love my son, but that didn't mean accepting disrespect or mistreatment. Sometimes, the most loving action is establishing firm boundaries that create the conditions for mutual respect to flourish. As I looked at Martha's favorite mountain painting, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. "You were right, my love," I whispered to her memory. Sometimes courage is a quiet voice, and sometimes it needs to roar. The path forward with Thomas remained uncertain, but I faced it with newfound clarity and strength. Whatever happened, I would face it as Martha had taught me, with dignity, self-respect, and the courage to stand firm in my truth. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with loved ones? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and self-respect.